Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day, everyone. In this lesson, we will be discussing the historical development of the Philippines during the martial law era and the Fourth Republic and Post-Edsa. Let us begin with what President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. said. He quoted that there are many things we do not want about our world. Let us not just mourn them, let us change them. This quote means that the time is now. In government, we have to pledge the severest leadership in integrity as well as discipline. Public officials shall set the vision for simplicity within the bonds of civility. Let us be true to ourselves as the people of a poor nation struggling to be prosperous, and whatever our personal circumstances, riches or poor, we are all citizens in poverty. Today with us, self-reliance is no longer an option. It is our fate. Martial law era and the Fourth Republic. In this topic, we will talk about the overview, the timeline and important events and end of Marcos regime. First off, overview. Let us define what martial law is. Martial law refers to several intermittent periods in Philippine history wherein the Philippine head of state, the president, places an area under the control of the armed forces of the Philippines and its predecessor bodies. In other words, it is the temporary imposition of direct military control of normal civil functions, or suspension of civil law by a government, especially in response to a temporary emergency where civil forces are overwhelmed in an occupied territory. Marcos administration from year 1965 to 1986. Ferdinand Marcos was the Philippine president from 1965 to 1986, a period exceeding 20 years. After serving two terms of president of the Philippines from 1965 to 1972, President Ferdinand Marcos announced that he had placed the entirety of the Philippines under martial law. He declared martial law under the Constitution to assume dictatorial powers to tame the political chaos that was then engulfing the nation. The reason why Marcos declared martial law on the nation from 1972 to 1981 is to suppress increasing civil strife and the threat of a communist takeover following a series of bombings in Manila. He declared the virtue of Proclamation 1081, which he signed on 21st of September. He rationalized that martial law was the only option that would solve the rebellion which posed a threat to the peace and order of the country. During the martial law era, the economy in the Philippines, according to the World Bank, the Philippine gross domestic product quadrupled from $8 billion in 1972 to $32.54 billion in 1980, for an inflation-adjusted average growth rate of 6% per year. But the martial law era under Marcos was marked by plunder, repression, torture, and atrocity. As many as 3,000 were murdered, 35,000 were tortured, and 70,000 are illegally detained. And the Philippines suffered from massive and uncontrolled corruption. Some estimates, including that by the World Bank, the Marcos family's stolen wealth at $10 billion. Plunder was also achieved through the creation of government monopolies, awarding loans to cronies, direct reading of the public treasury, use of dummy corporations to launder money abroad, scheming of international aid, and hiding of wealth in bank account overseas. The Fourth Republic. The Fourth Republic from 1981, where Marcos ended the martial law period, to 1986. In June 16, 1981, 6 months after the lifting of martial law, the first presidential election in 12 years was held, in which pitted Marcos and his kulusang Bagong Lipunan party against retired General Alejo Santos of the Nacionalista Party, and as to be expected, President Marcos ran and won a massive victory over the other candidates. In 1983, Benigno Aquino Jr. was assassinated at the Manila International Airport upon his return to the Philippines after a long period of exile, which resulted a popular dissatisfaction with Marcos and began a succession of events, including pressure from the United States. The Philippine economy also suffered a great decline after the Aquino assassination. The economy experienced negative economic growth and continued to decline despite the government's recovery efforts. Political trouble also hindered the entry of foreign investments and foreign banks stopped granting loans to the Philippine government. And the unemployment rate ballooned from 6.30% in 1972 to 12.55% in 1985. End of Marcos regime. After a 20-year rule that ended in loss of livelihood, extreme poverty, and a crushing debt crisis, the fraudulent result was not accepted by Aquino and her supporters. International observers, including a U.S. delegation led by Senator Richard Lugar, denounced the official result in that peaceful 1986 revolution that forced Marcos into exile in Hawaii, while Corazon Aquino became the 11th President of the Philippines on February 25, 1986. Post-Edsa. Post-Edsa is the People Power Revolution, also known as the EDSA Revolution or the February Revolution. It was a series of popular demonstrations in the Philippines, mostly in Metro Manila, from February 22 to 25 in 1986. It is a sustained campaign of civil resistance against regime violence and electoral fraud, where millions of Filipinos in 1986 walks along EDSA to begin a new era marked by true freedom and democracy. It is also referred to as the Yellow Revolution due to the presence of yellow ribbons during the demonstration. The President and her administration. Corazon Aquino began following the triumph of the peaceful People Power Revolution. She spanned a 6-year period from February 25, 1986 to June 30, 1992. And here are some of her administration. When Corazon Aquino became president, she inherited an economy that was bankrupt and debt-ridden. One of her boldest moves was to dismantle the various monopolies that were perpetrated. And immediately after assuming the presidency, she abolished the 1973 Constitution that was forced during martial law, and instead promulgated the provisional 1986 Freedom Constitution. And upon her ascension into power, President Aquino envisioned agrarian and land reform as the centerpiece of her administration's social legislative agenda. When Aquino assumed the presidency in 1986, 31 billion pesos, slightly more than 25% of the government's budget, was allocated to public sector enterprises, government-owned or government-controlled corporations, in form of equity infusions, subsidies, and loans. And here are the list of the presidents after Corazon Aquino. We have here Fidel V. Ramos, Joseph Estrada, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, Benigno Aquino III, and the current president, Rodrigo Duterte. For your task, you have to answer these two questions in the comment section box below. Question number 1 is, when did Marcos declared martial law? And the other one is, why did President Marcos declared martial law? And that's all for our today's discussion. If you have any question, please ask Ma'am Prim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.